We were 14,000 feet above sea level and grateful for the sturdy rock beneath us. There at the top of Pikes Peak in Colorado Springs, we were in awe. This summer, my family, ages 8 through 76, took the COG rail train to the summit, which I highly recommend. First, because, well, at times you're ascending at a 26-degree incline, and if the cogs of the wheel and the cogs of the rail weren't gripping each other, you would, slide all the way back down to the bottom. But second, because of what the park ranger tells you on the way up. Look out the window, he encouraged. Ancient juniper trees, fuzzy-faced marmots, shockingly blue flowers that bloom only in July, gravel the size of boulders, and the stories of the explorers that had come this way. Near the top, he told us about Catherine Lee Bates, who in 1893 ascended by prairie wagon and mules. And upon seeing what we were seeing, the shimmering panoramic vista, the sun's rays kissing the ground, the natural world stretching so far that we could see the curvature of the earth on a distant horizon, she rushed back down to the bottom and began to write, "Oh, beautiful for halcyon skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountain majesties above the enameled plain. America, America, God shed his grace on thee." We could see it too, what she saw, abundance and beauty and whatever is the color of majesty. But it was really quite poignant to have her words accompany us, this vision of America, knowing that up close and down below, the times we are living through would hardly be described like that. So I wondered, what's happening here? Was Bates's America worthy of this description? Was she just a dreamer-upper of hyperbole? It turns out that Catherine Lee Bates, in addition to being an obviously talented poet, was also a brilliant professor at Wellesley College. And she wrote for many newspapers, including the New York Times, advocating against the unjust treatment of women, the poor, people of color, and immigrants in her day. She was outraged, even activated by human suffering in her present, but she also had a far-reaching gaze. "Oh, beautiful for patriot dream," she wrote, "that sees beyond the years thine alabaster cities gleam, undimmed by human tears." This wasn't a naive utopian account of the America that was. No, she was dreaming up and drawing up the blueprints for the America that could be. From last Yom Kippur to this one, a great deal has changed in our country. This administration has declared war on immigrants and refugees. A desire for peace is replaced by the bravado of war-loving leaders. Climate advances meant to promise our children a future are undermined. Science is replaced by ideology. Free speech is being suppressed. Homeless people are being arrested with a callous disregard for their humanity. Political violence haunts public appearances. Billions of dollars for the medical care of those who need it most has been rerouted to line the pockets of the wealthy. Due process has been degraded, and free and fair elections are being openly threatened, and that is just some of it. It's so much to process as we alternate between enraged and numb, activated and exhausted. So how do we meet this moment? What is available to us from the canon of our tradition that will not just help us survive this, but might also give us the tools that we need to belt out the blueprints of the future on our horizon too? I want to offer what I think is an unmatched framework for our time, from Jewish tradition and history, a group of people who lived and led from about 800 to 400 BCE. We call them the prophets. We read them every Shabbat and did again this morning, and they have left us a distinct legacy. Why the prophets? Because they lived through the kinds of times that we are living through right now. Times of political upheaval and chaos, of greed and fear, of attacks on the most vulnerable, and threats to the social structure. Archaeologists point to the abundant evidence of their ministry serving the people of ancient Israel during deeply troubling times. And here's the kicker. Not only did they live through the darkest times, but they participated. They found their voice. They figured out their role. The prophet in Jewish tradition had two jobs. One was to cry out against the human suffering and injustice of their day. And the other was to gaze out at the horizon and imagine a future that gave the people hope, something to believe in, something to work toward. And so they have left us a roadmap for how we might face this moment too. In his book, The Prophets, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel wrote of these two symbiotic features. The prophet is a person who feels fiercely. To the prophet, injustice is a death blow to existence, a catastrophe, a threat to the world. An act of injustice is condemned not because a law is broken, but because a person is hurt. The prophet in Jewish tradition simply cannot stand to see people suffer, a thing that is tantamount to the humiliation of God. In the immediate present, here at the bottom of the mountain, Heschel explains, the images of the prophet don't shine, they burn. These same images have driven us towards our actions to protect our immigrant neighbors, to march through the streets, to stand by the most vulnerable, to defend our democracy, to meet the moment directly in front of us with a prophetic fervor, for we too simply cannot stand to see people suffer. And there are the prophetic images that shine, the ones that the prophet can see from the top of the mountain. Heschel explains that the prophet draws these images from the very first encounters in Torah between God and Abraham, the first Jew. In Bereshit, God reveals that God chose Abraham for this covenant because Abraham would go on to teach all of his future generations tzedek umishpat, justice and righteousness. The prophet Jeremiah understands this to mean that this is God's intended vision for the world from the very beginning. Chesed, mishpat, utzedakah ba'aretz. Jeremiah says kindness, justice, and righteousness on earth. And Abraham is tapped because he and his descendants would be God's way to manifest that vision. The prophet then is sustained in the darkness because he knows what is possible. He returns again and again to that vision for the future of goodness and kindness and justice and equality and even peace, knowing that it was promised from the beginning and is already on its way. This unfaltering knowledge translates into the prophetic images that shine. To better understand the prophet's twofold call, I reached out to one of the greatest prophets teachers of our time, Rabbi Dr. Tamara Eskenazi, and she taught me a tremendous amount. The first thing she told me was this: the prophets are writing from a world falling apart. Their messages of hope are coming from the brink of disaster. And every prophet has a different vision to share based on the world that he is living in, based on the particular fractures that are dragging his people so far down. Take the prophet Isaiah. It's the 8th century BCE, and the Assyrians are the dominant military and political power in the region. At this point, they've taken many cities, they've killed and they've pillaged, and our king is paying tribute to Assyria. At the same time, Isaiah is witnessing in his own society that it is rife with corruption and greed and the abandonment of the poor and the most vulnerable. It is bleak. But Isaiah settles into his twofold task, the now and the one day. Sarich sorarim v'chavrei ganavim, your rulers are rogues and cronies of thieves. He excoriates the people. Everyone avid for presents and greedy for gifts. They do not judge the case of the orphan, and the widow's cause never reaches them. His images burn. He rages about those left hungry and parched with thirst. And then he gazes off into the future, and he tells them, V'nafal Ashur, but Assyria will fall. Dr. Eskenazi assured me that these words are on the edge of absurdity. Imagine being in the middle of the darkness, each day a little worse than the one before it, and then a vision. But this is not how our story will end. No, our future looks like this. Assyria will fall, a king will reign in righteousness, and ministers will govern with justice. You will live in peaceful homes, in untroubled places of rest. You will sow by the waters and send out cattle and donkeys to pasture. 10 years from now, 20, 50, 100, this darkness that you're living through today will not be the world that your children inherit. Gaze outward with me, he tells them. What do you want for your children's children's children? Say it out loud. The future from this moment is not as inevitable and despairing as it feels today. Even amidst his burning accusations, he paints them a picture of a desirable and hopeful future that the people want very badly. And we can imagine how hungry they are for this based on how hungry we are for this and what fire it ignites inside of them to do something about it. V'chitetu charvotam le'itim, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, and they shall never again know war. It's a thread of hope, a panoramic vista from the top of the mountain. It's a lifeline. The prophet Micah, living and prophesying around this same time, also decried the overwhelming greed and corruption of the leaders and the suffering of the people. He can feel their fear. And so he gazes out to a distant future and he adds, V'yashvu ish tachat gafno, v'tachat te'enato ein macharid. And one day, every family shall sit under its own vine and fig tree, with none to make them afraid. And once the people start to imagine and believe that this is their destiny, they will surely wonder, well, if that's where we end up, and don't get me wrong, it sounds amazing. How do we get there? And so some prophets move from just images that shine to illuminating actions. Fast forward now to the 7th and 6th century BCE, to the prophet Jeremiah. The moment for his people is also dark. The Babylonians are at the gate now. There's no way that Jerusalem can stand up to these armies. The cities have been taken, and the people are terrified. And he tells them, we will be exiled now. When you get there, unpack, settle in. It won't be a short time. But then he turns his eyes towards the future, and he gives them a different narrative, recounting God's words to them. Od yishama ba'arei Yehuda. One day, there will be heard again in the towns of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem, which are now desolate, without humans, without animals. Kol sason v'kol simcha. The sounds of joy and gladness, the voice of bride and groom will return to this place. The images that shine. Jeremiah knows this promise to be true, but the people's spirits are crushed. So he does the wildest thing. On the eve of exile, Jeremiah goes and he buys a piece of land in Jerusalem. The commentator Rabbi Aidan Steinsaltz says, this purchase was not performed for commercial reasons, which would have been odd under the circumstances. Due to the siege, people did not have the peace of mind to think of investments for the future. The purchase of the field then was a meaningful step exemplifying the prophecy that the people will come home and rebuild one day. We understand that feeling of being under siege, which is making their imagination difficult for them. Yes? It's been a hard 9 months, a painful 2 years, a difficult many more years than that too. But Jeremiah isn't offering them a self-soothing, naive fantasy to pacify them. He is dead serious about that future vision. And so he is showing them how to invest in it, already beginning to make it a reality, even from the despair of their present. This was the sacred and difficult work of the prophets. This is the legacy that they leave for us today. The images that burn and the images that shine, an activated outrage in the present, and a resolute commitment to a shockingly better future. And yes, it was kind of absurd to paint a picture of Assyria falling, of safety and abundance, of returning after an exile that was just beginning. But in some ways, the absurdity is the most essential part. The renowned futurist Jim Dator likes to say that any useful statement about the future should at first seem ridiculous. The prophets are trying to teach us to imagine the future promised to Abraham by God, not a future that's just a little bit less bad than what we have now. Rather, to imagine a future that we would genuinely be proud and excited to hand down to our children's children's children. And it's hard to do. There's no doubt about that. You know what else happened when we were at the top of Pikes Peak? We saw the purple mountain majesties. We saw the amber waves of grain. And I also saw flashes of light in my brain because of the altitude. And I saw the EMTs putting pulsometers on 4 of my family's fingers because of the lack of oxygen. As much as we may want to, it is not easy to live at that perspective and believe that a better future is possible. But the prophet is not naive or a fool or an idealist. He is simply someone who knew that what today seems impossible can become obvious by tomorrow. And he wasn't alone. History is woven through with people who changed the narrative as the prophets did. I want you to know about Francis Perkins, who, by terrible coincidence, witnessed the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire on the Lower East Side in 1911. Grieving alongside other New Yorkers, she worked hard to address the suffering right in front of her and joined new committees to put laws in place which successfully stopped such devastating factory fires. But she didn't stop there. She also looked at her city and imagined something that had simply never existed before. Her ridiculous and impossible future vision resulted in unemployment insurance, health insurance, a 40-hour work week, a minimum wage, and the abolition of child labor. An utterly new reality that in hindsight seems so obvious. And remember those hippies from the Save the Whales campaign? They were the butt of many jokes. But actually, they did it. They saved the whales. They saw that humanity was at our lowest point in relationship to the oceans. Whales were near extinction, and big oil and the whaling industry were far more powerful than they were. But they imagined a world in greater harmony with the creatures below the surface, and they won. There were almost no whales left, and now there are whales again, each one the equivalent carbon capture of 35,000 trees. And I want us to remember how after World War II, when the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights was ratified, it was a radical document with radical ideas. Never before had the world come together to declare that every person had basic freedoms, freedoms that to most of us now seem obvious, because out of the darkness, they dared to speak into being a better future, one previously not articulated, until it was. These are not flawless examples, and there's more to do on each. But these are people who asked, what do we actually want? What would be an actually good future? And then they changed the narrative. I wonder what our vision would be. What if we stood at the top of our mountain and gazed off into the horizon, and with the prophet's lens, we said some stuff out loud too? 10, 20, 50, 100 years from now, we can imagine a child, our descendant or through some line in our family, living in this world that we today imagined into existence. What's their life like? What does it feel like to be there? What do we want for that child? And we could start ridiculous, big, like plowshares and pruning hooks, big, and fig trees and vines, big, and beautiful for spacious skies, big. If we don't set the contours for a future that we can build with others, someone else will. Or we might just be pulled forward by the inertia of time. Or we could be drafting the blueprints for the future yet unwritten. If we don't start now, when will we? In about a week, you'll get an email from the New Futures team, a group of CBE members who blessedly have spent the last year figuring out how to bring our congregation into an inspiring, creative, joyful, hopeful, and dead serious conversation about the future that we want for us and for all people, for Brooklyn, for our city, for our nation, for the world. Because the prophets have taught us that we have a lot more power to shape and build the future of our dreams than we think we do. And it will take all of the tools we have to bust our imaginations open enough to dream past the bleakness that is trying its very best to envelop us. We will need poetry and art and color and song and science and Jewish text and, yes, the prophet's paintbrush. We'll need a stiff drink and other hallucinogens. I did not say hallucinogens. And a walk in the woods and time by the ocean. We will need each other most of all. What the prophet did alone, we can do together. We'll start by articulating the values and stories from which our Isaiah-like visions and our Jeremiah-inspired actions can emerge as we light the horizon with our wildest dreams. When you get that invitation, we hope you'll say yes, because we need your voice and all of our voices in this or in some part of this process. Know that the prophet's lens and heart belong to you too, and that this 2,700-year-old legacy can bring us each fire and comfort and hope when we need it most. As we try on the prophet's mantle, I want to leave us with the soulful words of the poet Andrea Gibson, who knew something about our twofold task, and so wrote, "So build yourself as beautiful as you want your world to be. Wrap yourself in light, and then give yourself away with your heart, your brush, your march, your art, your poetry, your play. And for every day you paint the war, take a week and paint the beauty, the color, the shape of the landscape you're marching towards. Everyone knows what you're against. Show them what you're for."
God shed his grace on thee and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea.
Keni Hiratzon. Gemar Chatima Tova.